"You're just the cookie lady, not real military," someone muttered behind her back that Thursday, while the older vets chuckled into their coffee mugs, never looking her in the eye. She didn't correct them, didn't mention the blood, the battlefield, the 23 names etched in her memory like a second set of dog tags. She just placed another tray of lemon bars on the folding table, wiped her hands on her jeans, and glanced up at the dusty display case above the community room piano. Inside it, a folded flag, medals no one asked about, and a Bronze Star citation signed by a general they'd only ever seen in documentaries. It had been locked for years. Until one day, someone opened it and finally understood. If you agree that respect should never depend on rank, gender, or who speaks the loudest, like and subscribe. These stories matter more than ever. Most people at Post 142 knew her as Dana, the soft-spoken woman who always showed up early to set out chairs, poured the first pot of burnt coffee, and never complained when someone forgot her name. She was polite, gray at the temples, and built like someone who knew how to carry heavy things without needing help. She wore her sleeves rolled up and her voice tucked down. That was enough for them to assume she was just another supportive widow clinging to the memories of someone who'd actually served. What they didn't know, what none of them had asked, was that Sergeant First Class Dana Owens had been one of the Army's most decorated combat medics, a quiet storm in desert fatigues who saved lives with hands steadier than steel. But no one asked. Not once. Not when she signed up to run the first aid tent for the ROTC field day. Not when she submitted her name for post commander. And definitely not when Lieutenant Greg Mason smirked loud enough for everyone to hear, saying, "She probably thinks MRE stands for Mom's Recipe Exchange." The room laughed. Not mean, not cruel, just dismissive, the kind of laugh that doesn't sting right away but lingers like a paper cut under the skin. Dana didn't flinch. She nodded politely, excused herself, and went out to the parking lot to check on her dog, her excuse for needing air. But she didn't cry. She hadn't cried since Iraq. Not when the mortar hit the aid station. Not when she pulled Private Reynolds out of the fire. Not when she was told they wouldn't upgrade her award to a Silver Star because, politically, it's just too complicated right now. She simply waited. And waiting, as she had learned long ago, wasn't inaction. It was preparation. Inside, the post meeting continued. The regulars voted on paint colors and flag protocols. Dana returned quietly and resumed taking minutes, her pen moving without pause. No one noticed how straight her posture was, or how her left hand still bore the faint scar from a tourniquet that snapped mid-evacuation in 2004. No one noticed her at all, except maybe a cadet from the ROTC unit named Lana, who'd once asked Dana what the green ribbon above her fireplace meant. Dana had smiled and said, "It means I didn't run." That was it. And yet, Lana had started walking differently ever since. The ROTC training event was scheduled for Saturday, light drills, team building, maybe a barbecue if weather held. Dana showed up with her own med kit, cleaned and stocked. They'd said she didn't need to bring anything, but she did anyway. She set up in the corner, near the tree line, where she could see the whole field. No one greeted her. A few nodded. One volunteer mistook her for a parent. She didn't correct them. Then came the collapse. Mid-drill, during a navigation run, a cadet dropped hard, face first into the grass. Heat stroke, maybe worse. Chaos erupted. People ran, yelled, someone fumbled with a phone. Dana moved like lightning. Not rushed, precise. She had her bag opened before anyone else realized what was happening. "You," she said, pointing at a stunned ROTC kid. "Get cold packs, groin, underarms, neck. Now, you, flag someone from command. I need permission to administer for fluids." Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut clean through the panic. People listened, and for the first time in years, they really saw her. When the ambulance arrived, she'd already stabilized the cadet and briefed the EMTs in terms so detailed the paramedic asked what unit she was with. Dana replied, simply, "Retired." But the general overseeing the event overheard that word and squinted at her, something flickering in his memory. Later that day, someone finally looked her up. Her service record wasn't long, it was deep. Multiple deployments. A Bronze Star with Valor. A battlefield commendation for saving 5 lives under direct fire. Medical instructor to a dozen currently active officers. And she'd never once brought it up. Not once. That night, the whispers began to replace the laughter. Someone posted a photo from the field on the VFW's private page. Dana kneeling beside the cadet, flanked by medical gear, sleeves rolled up, eyes sharp. A caption read, "Turns out she wasn't just cookies and coffee." And still, Dana said nothing, because she didn't need to. Respect, she believed, wasn't a favor handed out in meetings. It was a mirror held up when no one thinks you're watching. And now, finally, someone was. She didn't ask for credit, didn't expect applause, and didn't even show up to the Monday meeting where people suddenly started calling her Sergeant Owens instead of Miss Dana. Instead, she spent the morning quietly restocking the first aid kits she'd used 2 days before, humming an old cadence tune under her breath while the coffee brewed in the canteen behind her. But things had shifted. The air at Post 142 didn't feel as thick with dismissal anymore. Cadets who once walked past her now paused to ask about trauma kits and how to recognize dehydration. Even Lieutenant Greg Mason, the one who had made that mom's recipe exchange crack, looked different now. Less smug, more cautious. He approached her that afternoon in the parking lot, hands tucked sheepishly into his jacket. "Hey," he said, not quite looking her in the eye. "That thing you did on Saturday, with Cadet Torres, that was something." Dana didn't respond right away. Just kept folding down the tailgate of her truck and sorting the faded canvas bags she always kept there. "He'll be all right," she said calmly. "We got him in time." Mason nodded, but the silence between them stretched. "Eventually," he murmured, "you ever teach any of that stuff?" Dana looked at him. Not with anger. Not with pride. Just with the calm weight of someone who lived through things the rest of them only read about in after-action reports. "I used to," she said. Then folks stopped asking. That answer hung in the air like smoke. Mason gave a stiff nod, then walked away slower than he had arrived. But the real shift came not from Mason, not even from the cadets, but from Lana, the youngest ROTC recruit, who showed up the next day with a notepad full of scribbles and a question. "Will you teach me what you know?" Dana blinked, caught off guard. Then, slowly, she nodded. What started as a quiet lesson in the back room turned into 3, then 5, then a dozen cadets gathering after drill to watch her demonstrate pressure dressing on pool noodles and 4 insertions on fake arms she'd built herself out of plastic tubing. She didn't charge. She didn't boast. She just taught. And they listened. Because for the first time, they knew who they were learning from. But word travels fast on bases and faster in military communities. Someone sent a clip of her fieldwork to a state training officer. That clip found its way to the inbox of a retired General, Brigadier General Susan Ellington, and Ellington nearly dropped her coffee when she saw it. "That's Owens," she whispered. "That's my medic." Within 48 hours, Post 142 received a call. "General Ellington would like to observe next week's commander elections. Please confirm." Nobody at the post knew how to respond. Ellington wasn't just a retired general. She was the general, the first female infantry commander in 3 states. Her presence wasn't casual. It meant something. And it meant she was coming because of Dana. Behind the scenes, everything changed. Flyers were reprinted. Ballots were updated. Suddenly, Dana's name was at the top of the commander candidate list, no longer in small print. People who had never once asked about her past now wanted to know every detail. "Where'd you serve? What was the worst day like? Why didn't you ever say anything before?" Dana's answer was always the same, because you weren't listening. The week leading up to the election, the post buzzed like a base under surprise inspection. Someone steam cleaned the floor. Flags were re-ironed. The very same guys who once snickered behind Dana's back now asked if she needed help carrying her gear. And still, she said nothing about it. Just packed her notes, her folded uniform, and a well-worn leather journal filled with combat protocols she'd written by hand. On Friday night, the eve of the vote, she placed that journal on the canteen bookshelf with a sticky note. "For anyone who wants to learn, not just lead." The next morning, the hall was standing room only. Every seat taken. Every cadet present. Even the ones who usually skipped Saturdays. Dana arrived last, quietly, in full uniform for the first time since she retired. Her hair was tied back. Her boots were shined. Her bronze star pinned precisely over her heart. And when she walked in, the room stood. Not because of her rank. Not because of the vote. But because every single person now understood who they'd nearly overlooked. As the national anthem played and the flag dipped, General Ellington entered from the back. No fanfare, no entourage, just quiet power. She didn't look at anyone else. She walked straight to Dana, extended her hand, and said loud enough for the room to hear, "Permission to stand with my medic?" Dana smiled small, tight, but real. Permission granted. And just like that, everything changed. Because in that moment, they all realized she never needed to raise her voice. She'd already raised the standard. They called the ceremony an election, but everyone in that room knew what it really was, a reckoning. Not the angry kind, not loud, not fiery, but quiet, inevitable, and sharp like a drawn blade no one saw coming until it caught the light. Post 142 had never seen the hall that full. Rows of polished boots tapped softly on the floor. Fresh-shaved cadets sat next to men with silver in their beards, but today no one cracked jokes or muttered "cookie lady" behind Dana Owen's back. Today, they waited. At exactly 0900, the old sergeant-at-arms called the meeting to order, but it was Dana who walked to the podium. She didn't need a mic. Her voice was steady, carried by the weight of all she hadn't said over the years. "I didn't come here to be thanked," she began, scanning the crowd. "I came because leadership isn't volume, it's vision. And sometimes vision walks softly and carries bandages instead of bullets." No one laughed. They leaned in. Then, halfway through the meeting, the doors opened again. And in walked Colonel Matthew Rivera, retired Marine Recon, someone no one had seen in years. He walked with a limp and a cane but commanded the air like a storm system. "Permission to speak, ma'am," he said, saluting Dana. She nodded once, confused. Rivera turned to the crowd. "I owe my life to Sergeant First Class Owens. Kandahar, 2004. She carried me 600 meters under mortar fire with a dislocated shoulder and 2 broken ribs. Never once stopped. Never once cried. Just whispered, 'You're not dying today, Marine,' and dragged me back to the LZ. The room was dead silent. And I've watched this post forget her every week since." He looked around. "Today, you remember." The applause didn't come in thunder. It rose like slow rain, first one cadet, then another, then all of them. And then came the vote. It wasn't close. Not even close. Dana won by unanimous ballot, every single one. But she didn't smile for the win. She smiled because when she turned around, she saw the future she had waited for. Young women standing straighter, cadets scribbling notes, old veterans nodding with quiet respect. General Ellington stood again. "Let it be recorded," she said, "that this post, once nearly blind to its own legend, is now led by one." That afternoon, the wooden placard above the main hall was quietly replaced. It now read, "Owens Hall, in honor of service unspoken." Dana didn't throw a party. She just reopened the journal on the canteen bookshelf and wrote 6 new pages that afternoon, tactical field notes, handwritten. When someone asked if she wanted a quote engraved beneath her name, she said no. But someone else suggested her words from earlier, and they stuck. A small brass plate was added under the plaque a week later. It read, "Leadership isn't volume. It's vision." Weeks passed. The story reached other posts. Emails came in. Invitations to speak. She declined most. But one thing changed. Every Thursday, at precisely 0700, a new line formed quietly outside Owens Hall. Cadets. New recruits. Even junior officers. All waiting for the same thing, not a speech, not a signature. Just 10 minutes with the woman who never raised her voice but raised the bar for what it meant to serve. And if you walk through that hallway today, you'll see the shadow box above the piano still sealed, just like always. But beside it, in a new case, rests something else, a faded field dressing kit, a laminated copy of her Bronze Star citation, and a sticky note taped inside the glass. It says, "I never needed you to remember my name. I just needed you to remember what service looks like." That sticky note has never fallen once. Not even in storms.